like Indiana Jones and the somehow never lost hat. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. Today I'm going to be ranking the 5 Indiana Jones films as part of my franchise Rankography series. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, ranked lists, and trailer reactions. So what is a Rankography exactly? Well, it's my ranking of a filmography, whether that be a director's output, an actor's appearances, or even an entire franchise. My rankographies are based on personal preference, and I rank movies according to how much I enjoyed them, rather than any specific technical merit or attribute. Remember, this is just my ranking, not the ranking, so be sure to post your own personal ranking of the Indiana Jones franchise in the comments below. It's wild to think that a set of movies I watched as a kid has blossomed into a series of 5 films that now technically constitute a long-running franchise. I know people have a lot of thoughts on the delayed continuation of what had been a long-standing trilogy of films, but the franchise has now somehow been around for more than 40 years. There's been some aging and changing over the decades, but there's no doubt that this is an exceptionally iconic and influential series and character, rejuvenating the adventure genre. Unlike some other franchises, it's not too difficult for me to rank the indie films, but it is impossible for me not to have a good time while watching any of them. I've already reviewed all 5 of these movies on this channel, so if you want to check those out for some more in-depth thoughts on each of them, I'll put links in the description below and also link them up in the cards as we go along. Alright, let's get this rankography started. Coming in at number 5, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Regardless of my positioning of this one, I know I'm going to get some flack from people, but I want to lead off by saying that I enjoyed this movie. It may be in the 5th spot, but it was still a fun, nostalgic return to the franchise. Honestly, I think it would be more accurate to say that this one is tied for the 4th place slot for me. The reasoning behind the placement of both of these films is different, but I think I like them about the same. But to account for potential recency bias and the fact that I've only seen this one once so far, Dial of Destiny gets the dishonor of the 5th spot for now. There are definitely some negative aspects that earn it a lower position than some of the other films. The pacing is pretty uneven, and there are a number of characters and story threads that are introduced without much explanation or effect, such as Mason and her first act involvement in the story. Also, as the only film in the franchise not directed by Steven Spielberg, it's missing something. James Mangold is a fine director, but he isn't able to replicate that classic Spielbergian look and feel, which is noticeable in its absence. That said, Dial of Destiny is still a film brimming with nostalgia. It's got a very classic retrieve the relic before the Nazis do storyline. It's a fun blend of action, adventure, and humor, and Indy is as charming as ever. There's an added downbeat quality to the story and his character that we haven't experienced before, but the unexpected poignancy of his character arc was a welcome and impactful surprise. He may not move the way he used to, with seemingly the years and the mileage finally catching up with him, but he still manages to pack a punch, and it was fun to see him embark on one final puzzle-solving, globe-trotting, sci-fi fantasy-tinged adventure before hanging up his hat and whip. Coming in at number 4, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I'm sure the vast majority of rankings have this film at or near the bottom of the franchise pile, but I just want to make sure I make it clear that just like the number 5 film, I don't dislike this movie at all. In fact, I quite enjoy it and genuinely cannot understand the widespread hate for it. I get into it a lot more in my review for this film, so check that out if you want my extensive reasoning on that particular matter. But for this ranking, I'll boil it down to the major takeaway point. All of the films in this franchise have had ridiculous, fantastical sci-fi elements at their core, so the bizarre outrage over this film's specific brand of sci-fi is just nonsensical. The unrealistic and goofy aspects have always been a part of this franchise, and are part of what makes these movies so fun. It all ties back to the pulpy action serial inspiration for the first film, and just like it did then, it continues to work here. Set 19 years after the 3rd film, and coming out 19 years after the 3rd film, this delayed legacy sequel had its work cut out for it. But apart from a glossy sheen and some gray hair, this is the same old Indy. Harrison Ford entertainingly falls right back into character for another humorous and exciting adventure. The CGI is a bit excessive and certainly looks dated now, but the practical effects of the action sequences are as good as ever. The story isn't quite as tight as those in the original trilogy, which drops it down in the ranking for me, but seeing an older indie contend with the zeitgeist of 1950s paranoia and fear of the unknown was really interesting. Yes, it's near the bottom of my list, but I'd never consider skipping it during a franchise rewatch. And more importantly, I continue to enjoy it every time I rewatch it. Coming in at number 3, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Although I still love this movie and rate it quite highly, it is unquestionably my least favorite of the original trilogy. I know that's a pretty common opinion, but it certainly never used to be one for me. This actually used to be my favorite of the franchise when I was a kid. Probably a little strange, but I was always drawn to the darkness of this one. I was that kid who loved reading and watching horror stories, and you could argue that this franchise outlier was almost a horror adventure at times, with its frequent creepy imagery and cult-based storyline. At the same time, the tonal dichotomy was out of control, with some of the most over-the-top gags and jokes in the whole franchise, not to mention the inclusion of Short Round, Indy's pint-sized sidekick of sorts. This prequel may have been darker than its franchise predecessor, but it was still loaded with classic Indiana Jones moments, including a number of exceptionally memorable action sequences, like the minecart chase and the ridiculous yet entertaining plane-to-raft escape. This film does have some pacing issues, especially throughout the second act, but the real problem, and the thing that really pulls this film down for me, is Willie Scott. What an irritating and disappointing character. Her fish out of water shtick is a one-note joke that gets old fast, though not quite as fast as her near-constant screaming does. She's such a disappointing regression from Marion in Raiders of the Lost Ark, threatening to take the whole story down with her. Luckily, there's enough to this film besides her that manages to keep it all afloat and mostly enjoyable. Coming in at number 2, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. This third film in the franchise, and the closing bookend of the original trilogy, used to be my least favorite as a kid. I don't have much explanation for that, other than the fact that it was also my least watched, but as you could clearly tell, it's moved up in the ranking for me. This film certainly has quite a few similarities to Raiders of the Lost Ark, especially with the race against time, and Nazis, to find a religious relic, but it would be unfair to call this first true sequel in the franchise a rehash. This film mixes up a lot of things, and even though it still has some minor issues, it's one of the most well-paced and consistently fun films in the franchise. Even though the action sequences might not be as immediately memorable as the boulder run in Raiders or the minecart chase in Temple of Doom, they're still numerous and incredibly entertaining here. All of the films of the franchise had had some comedy to them, but this film brought an enjoyable lightness to the characters and adventure, which was certainly a nice relief after the darkness of Temple of Doom. The bright tone helped to distinguish it from its predecessors, but the other major change was the shift towards focusing on family. This movie featured Sean Connery in the role of Dr. Henry Jones Sr., Indy's father. Ford and Connery have got great chemistry together, and there's certainly a lot of humor that comes from their interactions, but there's a more impactful, emotional side to it all too. Because the search for the Holy Grail isn't really about the Grail. It's about the restoration of a father-son relationship. So that means my number 1 Indiana Jones movie is Raiders of the Lost Ark. This and my number 2 film were surprisingly close in terms of rating and ranking, but the first film of the franchise comes out on top for me. Raiders of the Lost Ark didn't even have the Indiana Jones branding in its title, but it's no surprise that this film went on to spawn such a successful and well-known franchise. So many of the things that we take for granted or consider tropes in adventure films got their cinematic start here. Raiders was inspired by adventure serials of the 40s, but it went on to inspire and influence countless other films. Even though Temple of Doom is technically the first film in the series, chronologically speaking, as a prequel, it's Raiders of the Lost Ark that introduced us to the character of Indiana Jones, and also to the unique tone and adventurous approach that would come to define the franchise. Everybody's favorite archaeological adventurer deciphers clues and solves puzzles while tracking down a fantastical magical artifact in exciting and stylish fashion. Armed with his hat, whip, intellect, and charm, Indy, played by the perfectly cast Harrison Ford, embarks on a series of miniature globe-trotting adventures, mimicking the episodic nature of the serials the film was inspired by. Borrowing a phrase from the James Bond franchise, I'll coin the term indie girl here, because no discussion of Raiders of the Lost Ark would be complete without mentioning the best indie girl of the franchise, Marion Ravenwood. The rest of the series would waver on this, but Raiders stepped outside of the norms and stereotypes of female characters in adventure films by giving us a fiercely independent character who was anything but the typical damsel in distress. In fact, she's the kind of character who would probably punch somebody for referring to her as an indie girl, so let me revise my statement and say that she's one of the best characters in the franchise, period. Alright, so that's my rankography of the Indiana Jones franchise. 42 years, 5 films, and 1 iconic hat. What does your ranking look like? I'd love to see some reasoning for your order, so be sure to post it in the comments below. Remember, I've already reviewed all 5 of these movies, so you could check those videos out if you want some more in-depth discussion of each, as well as my ratings, pros and cons, and even tailored film recommendations. And if you're interested in buying any of these movies, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this rankography, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this, as well as movie reviews. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.